Only 2% of human history has been lived under anything resembling democratic rule. For the vast majority of recorded civilization, kings, emperors, pharaohs, and warlords decided the fate of billions. The idea that ordinary people should govern themselves was considered radical, dangerous, even absurd by most of the world's most powerful rulers. And yet here we are. But the story of how democracy survived, collapsed, was forgotten, and was reborn is far stranger and more violent than most people ever learn in school. In the next 10 minutes, you are going to travel from the dusty hillsides of ancient Athens through the blood-soaked revolutions of Europe and America, all the way to the fragile democracies of the modern world. You will see how democracy has died before and come back. You will discover which civilization built a democratic system 500 years before Greece that almost nobody talks about. And you will understand the one brutal truth about democracy that its greatest champions tried their hardest to hide, because it changes everything about how you see the governments that exist today. Let us start at the beginning. Or rather, what most people think is the beginning. Ancient Athens, around 507 BCE. A reformer named Cleisthenes, often called the father of Athenian democracy, restructured the Athenian government after a period of tyranny. He created a system called democratia, combining the Greek words demos, meaning people, and kratos, meaning power. People power. It sounded revolutionary. And in many ways, it was. The Athenian assembly, known as the ecclesia, allowed male citizens to gather, debate, and vote on laws directly. This was not representative democracy, where you elect someone to vote for you. This was direct democracy, where citizens showed up in person to the hillside known as the PNYX and cast their votes themselves. At its peak, roughly 30,000 men were eligible to participate. That sounds impressive until you consider that Athens had a total population of around 300,000 people. Women could not vote. Slaves could not vote. Foreign residents could not vote. In reality, Athenian democracy served about 10% of its actual population. But here is what nobody talks about. Athens was not even the first democracy. Centuries earlier, the Republic of Vaishali in what is now northeastern India operated under a system of elected representatives, public deliberation, and rule of law. Some historians date this system to as early as the 6th century BCE, overlapping with or even predating Athens. The Iroquois Confederacy in North America developed a sophisticated democratic governance structure that influenced the framers of the United States Constitution more than most American textbooks are willing to admit. Democracy was not invented in one place. It kept being invented, over and over, because humans kept arriving at the same conclusion: concentrated power corrupts, and shared power endures. Back in Athens, democracy faced its first great test almost immediately. The Persian Wars of the early 5th century BCE threatened to erase the Greek city-states entirely. And for a brief, extraordinary moment, democratic Athens became the military and cultural superpower of the ancient world. The victory at Marathon in 490 BCE and the naval triumph at Salamis in 480 BCE were both products of a society that had given ordinary citizens a stake in their own defense. Men fight harder when they are protecting something that belongs to them. But Athenian democracy also executed Socrates in 399 BCE for the crime of asking too many uncomfortable questions. It voted to massacre the population of Melos for refusing to join an alliance. Democracy, it turned out, was capable of tremendous cruelty when the majority decided cruelty was convenient. This tension between majority rule and individual rights would haunt democratic theory for the next 2,500 years. Alexander the Great ended the independence of Athens in 338 BCE. After that, democracy as a functioning system largely disappeared from the Mediterranean world for centuries. Rome experimented with a republic, and for roughly 500 years, the Roman Senate and elected consuls managed the most powerful state in the Western world. But the Roman Republic was deeply oligarchic. Only the wealthy could realistically hold office. And by 27 BCE, the Republic had collapsed entirely under the weight of civil war, and Augustus Caesar became the first Roman emperor. After Rome fell in 476 CE, Europe entered a long period where democratic ideas were essentially dormant. Feudalism, the Catholic Church, and absolute monarchy dominated the continent. The word democracy itself became associated with chaos and mob rule. Even educated philosophers during the medieval period largely viewed it with suspicion. Then came Magna Carta in 1215. An English document forced upon King John by rebellious barons, it established for the first time in writing that even a king was subject to the law. It did not create democracy, but it planted a seed. The idea that power had limits, that rulers could be held accountable. Over the following centuries, England slowly, painfully developed a parliament with genuine authority to check the monarchy. The Protestant Reformation of the 16th century shattered the religious monopoly of the Catholic Church and unleashed a wave of questions about authority, conscience, and individual rights. If a man could read the Bible and interpret it himself, why could he not also interpret the law himself? These were dangerous ideas. People were burned alive for asking them. But the questions would not stop. By the 17th century, England's parliament and its kings were at war. The English Civil War from 1642 to 1651 resulted in the execution of King Charles I, a moment so shocking to the European world that it essentially had no precedent. A king was put on trial by his own subjects and beheaded. For a brief period, England was a republic. It did not last. But the idea did. The Enlightenment of the 18th century produced the philosophical ammunition that would finally detonate the old order. John Locke argued that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. Jean-Jacques Rousseau wrote about the general will of the people. Montesquieu described the separation of powers. These were not just abstract ideas. They were blueprints. The American Revolution of 1776 was the first successful large-scale experiment in building a modern democratic republic. The United States Constitution, ratified in 1788, created a system of checks and balances, elected representatives, and protected individual rights. It was imperfect from the start. It counted enslaved black Americans as 3/5 of a person for census purposes while denying them all rights. Women could not vote. But the framework existed, and over time, through war and protest and legislation, it expanded. The French Revolution of 1789 took a more violent path. The ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity led to the execution of the king and queen, but also to the Reign of Terror, where the revolutionary government itself guillotined tens of thousands of its own citizens. Napoleon eventually hijacked the revolution entirely and declared himself emperor. This was the second great warning that democracy is fragile, that it can be consumed by the very passions it unleashes. But here is what nobody talks about. The 19th and 20th centuries saw more democratic experiments fail than succeed. Between 1920 and 1975, over 30 democracies around the world collapsed into authoritarianism. Germany's Weimar Republic, one of the most sophisticated democratic systems ever designed, gave way to Adolf Hitler through a combination of economic crisis, institutional weakness, and public exhaustion with political dysfunction. Democracy does not die with a bang. It dies when people stop believing it can solve their problems. Today, according to the Freedom House annual report, only 43% of the world's population lives in a country classified as free. That number has been declining for 17 consecutive years. Backsliding is happening across multiple continents, including in countries that once seemed like secure democracies. Erosion comes slowly and then suddenly. Institutions weaken. Courts are packed. Press freedoms shrink. Elections are held but outcomes are manipulated. The history of democracy is not a straight line from Athens to freedom. It is a cycle of invention, collapse, rediscovery, and threat. Every generation that has ever lived under democratic rule eventually had to decide whether to defend it or watch it disappear. The ancient Athenians failed to preserve theirs. The Roman Republicans failed. Weimar Germany failed. Before you go, if you learned something valuable today, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to History Vault YT for a brand new video every single day. We will see you in the next one.